Hello everyone and welcome back to another video on the channel. Today we're going to be talking about the brand new Scott Beck and Bryan Wood's horror film called Heretic. This movie comes from A24, starring Hugh Grant, Sophie Thatcher, and Chloe East. And I was pretty excited about this movie, mainly because of the fact that it is an A24 horror film. And if you know me and my channel, you know that these are the type of horror movies that I really latch onto. I like the more psychological, more, I guess, thematically resonant films that come from studios like Neon or A24 versus the more, general audience approach that's, Universal has or Warner Brothers or Blumhouse has when it comes to their horror films. And that's not to discount any of those films. We just had Smile 2, which I did really enjoy in theaters just a few weeks ago. And so as horror fans, having this vast, variety of these different horror films is really good. And so when you're going into this movie, don't expect the type of jump scare, gory type of movies that you got out of Smile 2 or Terrifier 3 or other films like that. This is definitely more psychological and more, interesting and more dialogue heavy and more of a thriller than it is a straight up horror movie. And that is what I enjoyed about this movie, because I thought it had very interesting writing. I thought it had a very great direction behind it. I think it's possibly Scott Beck and Bryan Wood's best film as of yet. And so of course I will be getting to spoilers for Heretic. So if you haven't had a chance to watch this movie, go out to theaters, watch this movie, come back here, and let's get into everything about Heretic. So what is this film about? Well, essentially it follows two Mormon missionaries played by Sophie Thatcher and Chloe East, who are going door by door to spread the word of Jesus Christ for their Latter-day Saints church. And essentially they finally go up to the house of the Hugh Grant character, this very strange man who has a lot of interesting ideologies on religion, and he kind of lures them into this house, claiming that his wife is in the other room baking blueberry pie, and that is essentially what gets them into this situation where he locks them in there and takes them on this journey of discovering what their belief actually is, making them face the choice between belief and disbelief. What is true, what is not, digging into religion in general as it compares itself from the Church of Mormon to all the other churches, all the other doctrines that people follow. And it's a very interesting psychological breakdown of belief. And again, that is the type of movies that I really do like. If I were to compare this movie to anything, honestly, I think Knock at the Cabin tonally and story-wise, it kind of matches that a little bit, which is why I had the poster there. But I think the feeling that I got and the vibe that I got mostly out of this movie was that of, Mike Flanagan's Midnight Mass. And when I go ahead and compare this film to something like Midnight Mass, I don't mean that from a story or a plot standpoint. That show has a lot more similarities to something like Stephen King's Salem's Lot, which if you know that story, you know exactly what Midnight Mass is kind of going for. I don't want to spoil it if you haven't seen that show already, because it is a very great show. Go watch Mike Flanagan's Midnight Mass. It is a masterpiece. But when I compare those two things, it is because that show is a great deconstruction of religion from a both organized religion standpoint, but also to a more individualized, faith-based standpoint for an individual person. I think that is what this movie breaks down extremely well. And so I'll be getting to our two main characters with PAXTON and Barnes and their different philosophies and their different connection to their church, and how this Hugh Grant character kind of breaks down their beliefs into a way where it forces them to grow in very interesting ways. So let's get into the story, I guess. Let's start off with the Barnes character, because this is the character that is more, flying by the seat of her pants. She is the character who is more, I guess, open to ideologies outside of her own. The other PAXTON character is much more based strictly in the Mormon belief. She has a very hard time saying the word pornography at the beginning, the opening scene of this film, whereas the other character is a little bit more open to, things that's outside of what they're allowed to, be interested in. And as somebody who grew up around neighbors who were Mormon, or, family friends that were Mormon, they are very restricted on what they can and cannot do, what they can and cannot consume when it comes to media, when it comes to the words I can say, and all this sort of stuff. And I think that PAXTON character is very much that sort of thing, versus, a particular friend of mine was much more open to learning other things and didn't want to be strictly stuck inside of the church. And that is what the Barnes character was, which made her a very engaging protagonist, as you thought, at least for the beginning of the movie, because she was the one that you thought was going to be able to break free of all these things, because the other girl was a little bit more uptight and wasn't able to, I guess, maneuver through this game that Hugh Grant's character was playing with them. And that's what this movie is. It's a giant game that Hugh Grant's character is essentially imposing upon these characters, making them question their faith and their belief systems. And when you have this character played by Sophie Thatcher go head to head against Hugh Grant, and these ideologies and these monologues that they each have towards each other when it comes to religion, it's really, really engaging. And that's when I have to praise the writing for this movie even more so, because there is a phenomenal monologue at the beginning of the second act of this movie with Hugh Grant's character essentially explaining this analogy between, organized religions and board games and monopolies and fast food restaurants, and comparing them to different iterations of things that have come in the past, like music that is iterating other songs that is iterating other songs, that is kind of hard to dig down to, find out what was the original text, what was the original idea behind all of these religions. And it's really fascinating monologue where at a lot of points, especially with, me personally, I'm like, I kind of agree with this guy, even though I'm kind of agreeing with the villain of the story. You kind of also break down when the Sophie Thatcher character pushes against those ideologies and says you're only pointing out the similarities between these things, even though there are vast differences. And so from a writing standpoint, the movie does a really great job at setting you as a character to listen to the ideologies of these characters clash in this movie and making you form your own opinion about it. I don't think this movie necessarily has any specific standpoints on religion. I think you can watch this movie as somebody who does believe in a god and come out of the movie thinking that, oh, the main character got out of it because of their belief system. Or you can go into it like me, who is a little bit more agnostic, who is, going to see this movie as a character that is very uptight when it comes to their religion and, trying to break free from that a little bit to, question that authority, to question these, ideas that are imposed on them at a very young age, and having that to be able to break free of this situation, because you have to challenge these ideologies to essentially know what the truth is and try to get down to the bottom of what you truly believe in the end of things. And I think that this movie is a great way to maneuver through those messages in a very engaging way with characters that were very interesting. And because this writing was so engaging, it just elevated the performances even more, because Sophie Thatcher had a lot to work with in this role, being the character that was trying to push back against Hugh Grant's character. I thought their dynamic back and forth was really great, but Hugh Grant in general, I think, stole this entire movie. He has such a fun time playing this guy who is, again, something just a little bit off with him at first when he's first, letting these women into his house and listening to their words and talking about the Church of Mormon, how knowledgeable he is in all these type of, religions. And as things get deeper and as things get more twisted, and his monologue, like I said, was incredible. This character has so much fun, being hammy at times, being creepy at other times, and just being very knowledgeable and very, so much of an intellectual threat for these characters, along with being a physical threat to these characters. And I thought that was a very engaging way to set and stage a horror movie with a character like this. Again, if you get Hugh Grant to play this character, it's a very strange swing for this type of role, because Hugh Grant is a little bit more goofy. You know him to be more of a comedic actor, and when he's playing this creepy character with these, goofy faces that he makes every once in a while, it just feels a little bit more unsettling. I think he really works in the role. But then you have Chloe East's character, who I didn't think was going to be the main character. I thought if any of these two women were going to die through the course of this movie, I thought she was going to be the one to go, because again, she was the more strictly traditional, Mormon character in this film, and so I didn't think she'd be able to break through her own, roadblocks in front of her that has been kind of, established from her growing up in the church and being so reserved and so conservative throughout her entire life. But I really like that this is the character that had the character arc from going from somebody who had a very hard time saying pornography at the beginning of the movie to going on to killing, Mr. Reed at the ending of this film and stabbing him in the neck and being able to, challenge those ideologies in a very intellectual way. And I really love the fact that this character was the one to break free from all of this. I really like that they took this character on that arc. And I think on second watch, because, on first watch, I was paying a little bit more attention to Sophie Thatcher's character, because she seemed to be like the main character. She seemed to be the one that would be the final girl, but the fact that she wasn't, that she died earlier on, I thought was a really great subversion of expectations. And so when you're looking at this movie from a surface level standpoint, it's filled with a lot of great performances, really great direction and writing. The cinematography in general was really, really great. I love the uses of close-ups and lighting that this movie had that reminded me a lot of something like Knock at the Cabin, specifically with the insert shots that they have of certain items or certain, faces or certain, close-ups of eyes or sweat or stuff like that made this movie really engaging from a visual standpoint. But beyond that, I think this movie is a lot more thematically resonant than something like Knock at the Cabin. I think it has a little bit more going on in between the lines of its script, which I thought was really fascinating. So let's get a little bit more into the philosophies of this movie, the thematic elements of this movie's ideas of religion. And so this movie is staged by the game that Mr. Reed is playing with these two characters, essentially forcing them to choose between two doors of belief and disbelief, and forcing these characters to question what is the basis of their own religion, because it seems like yet another iteration of the Bible, which is yet another iteration of the Torah, which is yet another iteration of whatever had come before. And this guy seems to claim that he knows the original text. He seems to know what the truth is behind all of these religions. And as you're going through this game, as these characters are faced to confront what their beliefs truly are, then you get to the bottom of what this Hugh Grant's character actually believes in. And so that is how Mr. Reed stages this game at the very beginning of the story, by setting them in front of two doors that says belief and disbelief. And Paxton's character wants to go to the door of disbelief because she thinks that is the easiest way out. She thinks that he wants them to choose that door because he wants them to, abandon their faith throughout this entire process. And so that's why she goes to that door, versus, the Barnes character wants to go to the door of belief because she wants to challenge those ideologies. She wants to fight back against what this guy is saying. And so she goes to that door and is able to convince Paxton to go over to the door with her. And as they go down this door, they realize that both those doors are going to go to the same place, into this bunker bunker below this house that is really creepy, and there's this woman that is, in the corner over there, and she's really creepy, and they don't know exactly what she is. And he kind of explains to her that this is a disciple of God, that this character has seen the other side, that this character will eat this pie and will die and will be resurrected magically, and this will be yet another evidence. Like this is the evidence that he needs to prove that he is right when it comes to his beliefs and his ideologies. Is if they are the witnesses to this, then he's confirmed that he has discovered the first true religion. And all this is cool. I was really on board with this idea, and I was starting to think, oh, maybe there is an actual supernatural element to this movie, which I was open to. I'm the type of person that watched Longlegs and didn't mind the fact that that movie went down a supernatural route, whereas I think most people were a little bit more wanting that movie to stay grounded and real and not want to get into anything supernatural with that film in particular. And so I was open to the idea of this movie getting supernatural, but I'm also glad that it didn't, because it grounded this movie in a bit more reality, because this Hugh Grant's character is a little bit more, he's crazy for sure. He's very much a psychopath. He's willing to kill these people to prove a point. And that is exactly what happened in this scenario, where when the doorbell rang and it was the guy looking for these two women because they went missing, that was the distraction that they needed for Hugh Grant's character to make the switch and to have that woman be replaced with another woman that was the one that will wake up and be resurrected, and to be able to read the script that she had to, convince these girls that they had witnessed a miracle, even though the Barnes character was able to see through that. And because she saw through that, the Hugh Grant character had to, take her out, had to, slice her throat to, force the other character to, not challenge him, to be able to believe and fall for these lies, so he can trap her into the further down bunker where all the other women are trapped, with that he's using to, lure all these other women into, believing in these philosophies that he is trying to impose on these other people, because it is all about control. And that is the one true religion that he believes in. He believes that all these, different religions that have become in the past has all been as a means to control other people, which to a certain extent has some truth in our real world, whether you like that or not. What would someone believe simply because somebody else says that it is true? It happens in our politics. It happens in Star Wars fandom. It happens at the beginning of the movie with Hugh Grant's character saying that the wife is inside making blueberry pie, even though she wasn't. And that is where I think this movie is at its most interesting, because I don't think it is necessarily a condemnation of religion, because yeah, organized religion sucks. It's really shitty and it hurts a lot and a lot of people. But I think at its core, maybe there was an idea of true belief from an individual level that does work. Maybe faith is something that can be separated from organized religion, and that is, I guess, something that I find some hope in terms of my own life, especially when it comes to something like Midnight Mass. I think that is an idea that show explores very well, where it is the individualized belief that I think is a little bit more important than the organized religion, because I think the organized religion is going to try to impose a certain amount of control over its people, over its followers, and wants to, have their followers go out and spread the word and sell their Bibles like a product, and has all the other points that this movie decides to make when it explores the levels of religion. But at its core, is faith necessarily really bad from an individual standpoint? And that is why I think this movie is so interesting, specifically when it comes to the PAXTON character, because you have a character that has been so, conservative and so, following the traditions of this church, be the one to start to challenge the Mr. Reed character from the advice and from the inspiration of the Barnes character, and to be able to, do something that the Hugh Grant character was not expecting, which was for her to break from convention, to do something that he wasn't expecting, to do something that was out of the path that he very carefully crafted for her to go down, to get into that final room, to lock her in the cage at the end of the movie. He wasn't expecting her to break free from that, I guess the fate of this character, believing in these certain things, and to do something that is more guided by free will. I thought that was a very interesting idea, to have her be the one to stab that character, to try to escape, and to have the Barnes character come back for one last, victory swing, to swing that, plank of wood with the nails, to kill the Hugh Grant character at the end of the film as a final sacrifice for her character. And I just thought it was very satisfying from a character standpoint to see these characters grow as much as they did. But because this is an A24 movie, of course the ending is not going to be as straightforward and unambiguous as it would be if it weren't an A24 movie. And so when it comes to the actual ending of the movie and the character arcs, yeah, sure, the character arcs, you can interpret it in your own way depending on your own, religious beliefs, which I think is the beauty of a character like the main character of this film. But when it comes to a strictly plot standpoint of the movie, at the end of the film, once Mr. Reed's character is killed and Sophie Thatcher's character sacrifices herself for PAXTON to be able to escape this place, and she runs up the stairs, and you see the great shot inside the little puzzle box of her running in there, to see her running up the stairs outside of the puzzle box. Great shot. I wish there's more, surreal real stuff like that inside of this movie, but when she does go up to the box and finds a way out of this house, and she gets outside and a butterfly lands on her finger, and then she looks back at it and the butterfly vanishes, and she has a very disconcerted look on her face. And that is a callback to the monologue earlier on in the film when it comes to the butterfly's dream, and the meaning of that being that a man once dreamt that he was a butterfly only to wake up and realize that he was still a man. And I think that metaphor is kind of hinting at the idea that maybe this character did die in the basement bleeding out along with her sister, with, you know, Mr. Reed's character. She didn't survive that stab wound, and she's just, you know, dreaming and believing that she can move on like the butterfly. She's dreaming that she is able to escape, to be able to get outside, to be able to get that sense of freedom again that she's been fighting so desperately to get to throughout the majority of this movie, only to realize that this is still all in her head, and that, yeah, maybe she did get through her character arc, and she did hold on to her beliefs throughout the entirety of this movie and throughout the entirety of being challenged by this Hugh Grant character, and to be able to push through that and be able to, you know, outsmart him in the end of it. But by the end of it, maybe she is still just dreaming of her escape, what she didn't really get to actually have. And so I think that ambiguity at the end of the film is very interesting. And I swear there is a line earlier on in the film, before the whole explanation of a butterfly's dream, that maybe makes a different, you know, explanation to this. I think Sophie Thatcher's character saw a butterfly inside of the house when they first entered, and she had some line about it as it compares to her father. I don't remember what that line was. And if you guys remember what that was, please let me know in the comments down below. I'm really struggling to remember what that was. But I want to say it was something like maybe after her father had died, she saw a butterfly as a resurrected version of him. And so maybe that's what the butterfly represents. It represents a resurrected version of Sophie Thatcher's character, and that she is still with her even in the afterlife as a new form in this butterfly. And maybe that's what it also means, but I don't remember if that was the explanation of the butterfly earlier on in the film. And so there are multiple interpretations you can get out of the ending of this film, which I think is really cool. That's something that A24 does really well. And again, that's something that as an audience member, I really latch onto. So I'm very curious to hear what you guys think of this film in the comment section down below. Again, let me know what you thought of the butterfly's dream, or what Sophie Thatcher's character said about the butterfly earlier on in the film, and just your overall thoughts on this film in general. Did you like it? What other films would you compare it to? I think it's really great combination between Midnight Mass and Knock at the Cabin. I know it's two strange, you know, comparisons to make, but that is kind of where I landed in this movie, and it was very much my thing. So thanks everybody for watching this video. Again, if you did enjoy this video, make sure you guys leave a like and subscribe to the channel to see more reviews just like this one. I just reviewed Terrifier 3, Smile 2. I just talked about Agatha all along in a live stream earlier last week, so definitely go ahead and check that out. I really did love Agatha, really clicked together for me. I also talked about Honora in that live stream. I don't know if I'll have time to make a dedicated review for Honora, but I did really love that movie as well. So check out that live stream, check out everything else here on the channel. I hope to see you all in my next review.